hear from multi-stakeholder initiatives that are trying to fix and address plastic pollution. There are many initiatives that are flourishing across the world, and we salute that. Led by businesses, led by NGOs, led by waste pickers, led by academia, and that is good.
Senegal producing
Good afternoon. I'm Dechin Siring, Regional Director for the UN Environment Program in Asia Pacific. I'm very happy to be moderating the session this afternoon. Our session will focus on finance that's crucial in order to achieve a circular plastic economy and eventually sustainable development. These multi-stakeholder dialogue sessions are part of the first open-ended working group meeting to set up an intergovernmental negotiating committee to negotiate a global instrument to end plastic pollution, in line with the United Nations Environment Assembly Resolution 5.2. We had at UNEA in early 2022 almost 200 nations agreeing to negotiate to finalize this legally binding treaty on pollution. Many of us had the honor to witness this historic resolution. The gaveling in of this resolution is really a true milestone in environmental diplomacy. So if I kickstart the session by providing the context of today's session. To end plastic pollution, substantive alterations are required across the plastic life cycle with a focus to increase the plastic circularity and to control plastic leakage. That really means that we look at plastic production, which includes raw materials, you look at new versus recycles, to plastic products, to its use, whether it's single use versus multiple use, to plastic waste management, focusing on recycling. We know we need to strengthen policies, upgrade technologies, we need to recreate new business models, and we need to scale up information and education for social and political awareness. But to achieve global reductions in plastic pollution at a sufficient scale, we need financial resources to make this transition to circular plastic economy. Sources of finance, we think, will change over time as investment opportunities evolve, but we see it as a mix of official development assistance, domestic resources, private investment, depending on the location and context. We're going to need more information about the kinds of investment, the financial incentives, instruments that would require to support this transition. That's going to be critical to any sustained long-term change. So we're going to need to understand the kinds of investment, financial services that could lock us into stranded assets for a linear economy. The investments and financing in the environment sector, such as to end plastic pollution, are rapidly evolving, and we think it's one of the biggest markets on the cards today. We're looking at the scale and turnover of the investments. We think they'll be huge for every segment of the plastic value chain to align to achieve plastic circularity, ending in plastic pollution. We've seen conventional investments through private sector participation, public-private partnerships, public sector funding, foreign direct investments, overseas development assistance. We've seen them grow, and we're very confident that after this United Nations Environmental Assembly resolution and working towards a legally binding instrument, the financial markets will have greater confidence. We're also reflecting and seeing many non-conventional or emerging forms of investments, and we're thinking of environmental and social governance investment, crowdfunding, startup investments, fintech, and so on. So we know that banks, insurers, investors have a major role to play in financing this transition to circular plastic economy. At the same time, trade policies can play a role by promoting the types of products and technologies that support a transition to a circular plastic economy. It can provide harmonized guidance that can support responsible management of plastic products. It can remove barriers that create unwanted trade effects and disputes. And we think it can provide clarity and transparency in plastic flows and management across borders. The aviation sector is another such example where proactive adoption of cabin waste management can reduce unnecessary use of plastics, increase reuse, recycling, which is essential. But we know this must be supported through smart regulations across borders that support airline efforts to manage plastics in a circular approach. So today's session will really begin a discussion on the role of banks and the financial sectors in driving responsible investment towards circular economy approaches that eliminate unwanted, unnecessary plastic from the economy, support reuse and recycling behavior, and waste management. We will also follow this by reflection on the importance of trade, trade policies, and how we can encourage the system changes that we need. Finally, we'll have an example of how international coordination on trade related policy could lead to improved management of waste, and we'll illustrate this in the case of a plastic product used in aviation. We have four very important speakers to start today's session. So let me first invite Ms. Krasimira Pecheva, who's the head of the ProCredit Group for Environmental Management and Import Reporting. ProCredit is a development-oriented commercial banking group from Germany. It specializes in working with small and medium businesses. The group's also dedicated a lot of effort to developing, implementing strategies to avoid plastic production and usage. And Ms. Pecheva will share the group's experience. Ms. Pecheva, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Dechen, for the introduction, and UNEP for hosting this highly needed event, as well as inviting ProCredit to share our experience on the topic. Allow me to briefly explain the context in which we developed and implemented our plastic strategy. As you mentioned, we are impact-oriented banking group headquartered in Frankfurt, in Germany, but actually we are operating in Eastern, Southeastern Europe, as well as in Ecuador.
Ms. Pecheva, if I may interrupt you, could you please speak into your microphone? We can't hear you so clearly.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Is it better?
Not so loud.
Okay. So okay, I should speak louder or
much better. It's very clear. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to explain a bit the context in which we developed our plastic strategy. ProCredit banks are development-oriented, impact-oriented banks which operate actually in southeastern and eastern Europe, and as well as in Ecuador. So we operate in transition countries facing multiple political, economic, social challenges, where in spite of their acute impact, the environmental issues are not yet given sufficient priority. In spite of this, we have long ago identified as a core priority environmental management and sustainable development of our clients. Since more than 10 years, we have established environmental teams and expertise in each of the banks in order to assess and reduce our own environmental impact, but also, and more importantly, the impact of our clients and projects that we finance. In this regard, we thoroughly assess the environmental impact of the activities we are about to finance, and either avoid financing some of them, or with green finance incentivize so environmental friendly investment, including transition to more sustainable activities and approaches. Already 20% of our portfolio is in green finance. So as part of this effort in 2019, we developed our strategy to reduce the production and usage of plastics. How? On the one hand, again, looking into our internal plastic footprint, so to say, by properly managing waste, eliminating single-use short-term plastic, integrating criteria in procurement, gradually substituting other types of plastic also even longer term. But again, where the bigger impact comes is looking into our portfolio and the projects that we are financing. So also trying now to reduce the footprint of our clients. We have on the one hand integrated in the environmental risk assessment national but also international regulations and recommendations related to the plastic usage and disposal. But as well, we have looked in more details in companies engaged in plastic production, where we basically have categorized the plastic production in three different categories. And based on this, we are completely excluding from financing certain types of plastic production and incentivizing the transition to more sustainable approaches in others. So the categories are basically, we have a so-called blacklist, which is also part of our exclusion list in all of the banks. These are plastics which are mostly single-use, where production can be completely abolished. Sustainable alternatives exist and are common. Also products banned in the EU, for example. We have also the gray list. So these are other single-use or short-term used items that still highly impact the environment. For example, food packaging, bottles, foils, and so on. For such activities, we could finance clients engaged in their production only if they are already implementing or they commit to transition to more sustainable practices related to the whole life cycle. For example, engage in proper waste management, change the product design, make reusable products, reduce quantity of used plastic, or use only or high amount of recycled material, assure recyclability, join and support local schemes to collect and recycle plastic waste, and yeah, similar examples. As an outcome, I could say we already have multiple examples of clients that committed and started implementing such transition strategies. We have also published some of these examples in order to showcase and to use as maybe inspiration for other financial institutions too. And then the third category is the so-called white list, so basically long-term plastic products where we would continue financing, but still we engage in discussion with the clients of improving then the sustainability of the processes or the products themselves. Although so far on our markets, we are only banking group to address the plastic topic in this sense. We hope that these efforts will be multiplied in the near future, which brings me to the last point I want to make a bit on the challenges we have been facing and on our expectations for areas of improvement. On the one hand, okay, being pioneer in this sphere, of course, puts more efforts and resources to pave the path, so to say, for implementing such strategies from a financial institution. For us was a challenge as financial experts to understand the plastic topic, to do the proper analysis, setting proper criteria, what is good and bad plastics, how to classify them, what are feasible alternatives, is technology available and accessible on our markets, what are meaningful improvement expectations from our clients, and so on. In this sense, of course, introducing common criteria, more universal criteria, green labeling, certification would be very beneficial and would facilitate wider application of such approaches from the financial sector in general. I believe it was many times mentioned in this forum, awareness and education on the topic overall in the society. We face it also among our staff, our clients. So this is area, of course, where a lot of improvement can be expected. The lacking or weak regulations, which are addressing often only parts of the issues, but not the whole life cycle, lack of proper infrastructure, for example, related to waste management, mechanisms to incentivize the transition, innovation and R&D, and so on. Still, I believe these challenges are multiple, but they also open numerous opportunities for improvements if, and I believe they will be addressed properly. So yeah, I will stop here, briefly explained our plastic approach, and happy to provide further information during the discussion. Thank you.
Much, Ms. Picheva. And I think there's been a lot of pioneering efforts. And I think we really take away the fact that we need to have more information. So understanding, the criteria, the different types of plastic, it's available to the financiers. I will now like to give the floor to Ms. Marla Garin Alvarez, Vice President for Sustainability at BDO Unibank. This is the largest bank in the Philippines. She heads a group sustainability office and she drives the execution of its sustainability framework and strategies. BDO Unibank recently issued one of the first blue bonds with the IFC support for about $100 million, and it established a new asset class in the Philippines debt market. This blue bond is one of the first such initiatives in Southeast Asia, and it will support work on solid waste management and marine plastics. Ms. Garen Alvarez, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me well.
Very clearly, Ms. Alvarez. Please.
That's good. Thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of BDO Unibank, I thank the United Nations Environment Program for this opportunity to participate in today's discussions and share our initiatives with you. So, maybe a little introduction on BDO. We are the largest bank in the Philippines in terms of resources, assets, loans, deposits, and we have an extensive network of over 1,400 branches and over 4,400 ATMs nationwide and in cities abroad. And this is also because we hold a significant market share of foreign currency remittances from overseas Filipino workers sending money back home. So as you can imagine, our size means we do have a great impact on the economy. And it also means there are great expectations on our fiduciary responsibilities to manage our environmental and social impact on our customers, our communities, and the country. Our sustainability philosophy is to achieve strategic resilience by incorporating sustainability in the way we do business. We aim to embed sustainability principles when making decisions, assessing our relationships, and creating products. And toward this end, we have created a sustainability framework that is based on the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And to support that, we have five key strategies that focus on the sustainability of our products, our contribution to the sustainability aspirations of the Philippines through financial inclusion, our human capital sustainability to develop a mindset on protecting the environment and managing our social impact among our over 38,000 employees, disaster response sustainability to make our communities more resilient and better prepared for natural and man-made disasters, which we are very prone to. And finally, a governance-based sustainability in pursuing business success with integrity, transparency, fairness, and accountability. In the Philippines, we are well known for our rallying cry of "We Find Ways." And among those ways is to help create a sustainable future for all. The question that was posed specifically for BDO is how can banks support the transition to a circular plastics economy and drive change towards responsible plastic management? Simply stated, we see the role of banks in mitigating planetary challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss through financing solutions that will mitigate these challenges. At the same time, banks also have a role in managing risks and pursuing opportunities to shape better, more inclusive economic, environmental, and social outcomes for our stakeholders. And when banks such as us support economic growth, we also play an important part in driving change towards sustainable consumption and production. And this is where the circular economy in general and the circular plastic economy in particular comes in. To quote from the UNEP's own report on financing circularity, when we redesign economies to embed circularity, it can change the way we produce and consume, address issues ranging from greenhouse gas emissions to plastic, resource scarcity, waste management, and the use of hazardous chemicals while increasing resilience. So the power to allocate capital or funding based on economic, environmental, and social impact criteria will help start and eventually scale the appropriate solutions that can drive a circular economy where it is most needed, faster, and more efficiently. And BDO embraces this role as part of its evolving sustainability journey. This journey for us started in 2010 when we became among the first banks to adopt a sustainable finance program and a risk based social and environmental management systems policy to facilitate loans for clean and renewable energy sources for the country. This was in partnership with the International Finance Corporation or IFC. In 2017, we were able to launch the first green bond in the Philippines and East Asia Pacific for 150 million US dollars, again from the IFC. And this funded an initial 7 renewable energy projects, 2 hydro, 4 biomass projects, and 1 wind farm project. As of 2021, from those 7 projects, we now have 54 renewable energy projects, which also include solar, wind, biomass, along with the hydro and geothermal. And we have to date funded close to 11 billion US dollars in sustainable finance projects. Now, early this year, in January, BDO launched its first ASEAN Sustainability Bond offering, which closed at 52.7 billion pesos or 991 million US dollars. This was oversubscribed by over 10 times its original target and is now the Philippines' largest corporate issue for bonds of this nature. These proceeds will finance and refinance green and social projects already with the bank and qualified under the Sustainable Finance Framework for Bond Issuances for BDO. Now, 2 weeks ago, as you mentioned earlier, we launched our first blue bond, again with the IFC, for 100 million US dollars. This is actually quite a modest amount, but it's a good way to kickstart or to initiate interest in this kind of bond offering. This is the first blue bond in Southeast Asia and also the first for IFC in the East Asia Pacific region. It's also among the first blue bond issuances by commercial banks in Asia using the IFC's Blue Finance Guidelines, which is a blue specific framework with metrics to monitor the use of proceeds and to report on relevant impact on blue categories. Currently, the projects in our pipeline are under the specific areas of sustainable water and wastewater management, mostly water supply and wastewater treatment. And in anticipation of future prospective projects, we are also looking at offshore renewable projects in the ocean. Or wind farms, for example, that are deployed on water. Now, specific to plastic recycling, BDO already finances small and medium enterprises that are in the business of plastic recycling. And this is more community based, as is more common in the Philippines, and not yet scaled to effectively mitigate the risk of having plastics dumped in the ocean throughout the country. We are hoping that with funding from the Blue Bond, our capacity building support from the IFC and guidance from the IFC Blue Finance, we can address the scale of the impact directly. So why is this blue bond an opportunity for the Philippines, and why is BDO doing this? This is a huge step for the Philippines because after China and Indonesia, the Philippines ranks as the world's third biggest polluter with an estimated 2.7 million metric tons of plastic waste generated each year. Unfortunately, the Philippines is called a sachet economy, and it's estimated that 163 million single-use sachets are disposed of every day. It's easy to blame the Philippines and other global south countries for the global plastic pollution crisis, but in reality, our markets are flooded with consumer products that are packaged with single-use plastics by multinational companies who aim to sell products at a lower cost. Now, it's not all bad. It's not all gloom. The Philippines also has the most progressive environmental law since 2001, which is inclusive and very much community based. Unfortunately, there are also challenges such as the lack of political will to enforce the law, contradicting implementing policies from government agencies handling waste and resource management, a lack of widespread awareness among the people, a lack of sanitary landfills and restrictions in building new ones, and a lack of waste disposal facilities. But with financial capital and the role of banks such as BDO, we can hope to partially address the need for more waste disposal facilities, new technology for recycling plastics, and a widespread awareness and education campaign to end single use plastic use once and for all and go back to what we actually had before, the use of traditional refillable and reusable packaging throughout the Philippine archipelago of 7,600 islands. So, um, with that, I thank you for this opportunity again, and I look forward to the panel discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Ms. Marla Gavin Alvarez. And I think you've raised many, really important issues. The fact that there is financing is very good news, but you've talked about awareness raising, you've talked about compliance, many critical issues. I've not been a very effective moderator. I think we have to stay with 5 minutes each. So I'm now going to turn
Sorry about
over. I think it's my moderation. So I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Daniel Ramos, and he's sitting with me. He's a legal officer in the Trade and Environment Division at the World Trade Organization. He supports the work of the Committee on Trade and Environment, the informal dialogue on plastics pollution, environmentally sustainable plastics trade. And this is an initiative to really explore how WTO could really contribute to reduce plastic pollution. And we also hope to transition to more environmentally sustainable trade in plastics. Ms. Alvarez already talked about, sort of the consumer products that are found in the Philippines with a lot of single-use plastics. So, Mr. Ramos, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll do my best. I'll try to stay under 5 minutes, but I understand this is such a complex and interesting topic as can be seen by our delegates here is still going strong with their discussion. So I understand also. It was very interesting to hear from Ms. Alvarez and Ms. Pesheva before. It has so many connections with what we were doing at WTO. But let me just start by saying that discussions on trade and environmental aspects of plastics date 1995, actually, discussions in the Committee on Trade and Environment of the WTO. And just I found this interesting when looking at the history of this. For instance, in 1995, Malaysia had already raised whether there should be not an effort to extend the sustainability and labeling certification requirements that were being imposed on timber products to also plastics, because plastics could be a substitute material at the time and also raise their own concerns. But of course, discussions have picked up at the WTO much more in the last few years, together with other trade and environmental issues. And in December 2020, so very recently, a group of members led by the coordinators Australia, Ecuador, Barbados, China, Fiji, and Morocco, started this informal dialogue, as you mentioned in your opening, and trying to better understand what are the connecting dots, in a sense, between trade and plastics pollution. And I noted down a few of the information that they already brought up in their efforts and discussions. So they discovered, for instance, that trade in plastics materials across the value chain and life cycle amount to 336 million tons every year. And once you hear that, that sounds strange, because that's almost around the total amount of plastics production per year of some estimates. But that's the nature of, and complexity of global value chains today, how things are produced, because these plastics are crossing borders several times, from primary plastics to as inputs to plastic products to waste. They also noted that of all of this trade in plastics, only 2% is plastics waste. More than 50% is in primary plastics. So there's a huge interest to better understanding what is happening and where these plastics are going. And of course, this is only part of the picture, because there's a lot of trade in plastics that does not get captured by official customs statistics. Once a plastic is embedded in a product, we are flying blind in a sense, because there's all of these trade that is continuing to happen with plastics embedded in these products, and we just don't know. For instance, 40% of a car by volume is plastics, but when you're importing a car or exporting a car, it doesn't come up as you're exporting plastics. So at the end of this year of discussions, last December, there was a historical moment at the WTO, I have to say. A ministerial statement on plastics pollution was adopted by 71 WTO members, co-sponsoring now, representing more than 75% of trade in plastics. And there in this ministerial statement, they recognize the work that they've done this first year, identifying, well, we do have a role to play here. Trade and trade policy has to be part of the solution, and pledge to continue to work on specific topics to try and contribute, to do their part to international, regional, and domestic efforts to address plastic pollution. This was not the only historical ministerial statement, I have to say, that was adopted in December. There was also two others. One, an umbrella, in a sense, ministerial statement, also supported by 71 members, trying to look at different environmental topics like climate change, circular economy, and other issues, and another one on fossil fuel subsidies reform. But coming back to what these minister of these 71, these trade ministers of 71 WTO members are trying to do, well, they're trying to answer your question, how trade policy can help. And I like to answer that question using something that our DG, Dr. Ngozi, likes to say, that trade is about people. That's the first step, recognizing that trade is about how we produce the things that we need every day, that we consume every day, in complex value chains, global value chains, and understanding the interactions. And where trade policy enters here is they are the economic levers that can help shift from unsustainable patterns of production and consumption towards sustainable ones. So really trying to affect system-wide change in how, in this case, plastics are produced, and trying to find alternatives, or trying to see what are the blockers or barriers towards a sustainable plastics economy. Let me finish by saying that what I heard here since I got here, it brings up, maybe it's just because of my mind as a trade expert, but a lot sounds like trade policy as well. And that's what we've seen in the past. Multilateral environmental agreements taking the lead, as they should, by indicating the goalposts and what they're trying to do to achieve sustainability. And then trade officials trying to do their part and understand, okay, what are the policies that we need to implement to reach those goals? In this case, what is new is that the trade community is from the start already trying to understand, instead of waiting for an agreement to come. So what I hope is that as they move forward, as they map the trade policy they're already adopting, try to learn best practices on what trade policies are effective into reducing plastic pollutions, that they can feed this information that they're generating, this constructive information to also other processes. And in the ministry statement that they notice clearly, the UNEA process is a main process that they need to contribute to and not duplicate work. So hopefully we are off to a good start here, and the discussions in the WCO can also support the process here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel Ramos. And I think stakeholder dialogues are really trying to do this. We have a process to negotiate an intergovernmental negotiating committee for a binding instrument, but we are inviting stakeholders because we have trade ministers, 71 trade ministers, we have banks, you have pro-credit groups, and we need everyone to come in. We don't have the time when you start to look at multilateral environmental agreements to have compliance regimes. I think everyone has to be a part of designing this instrument. So I think, clarity on plastic flows, management, trade policy, I think this is really very hopeful. I now come to our last speaker, Mr. John Godson, who's the Assistant Director of Sustainability in the International Air Transport Association, IATA. And IATA's activities related to cabin waste in planes were led by the Sustainability and Environmental Advisory Council, what they call SEAC. And they've been identifying, reviewing cabin waste issues, looking at issues, technologies, and they have a platform for airlines to share best practices and to advise in areas that require technical support, research, or regulatory engagement. I believe in October 2020, SEAC established a single-use plastic product working group with a focus on preparing guidance on harmonizing single-use plastic regulation and sustainable alternatives to single-use plastics. So, Mr. Godson, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daishan, and thank you very much to UNEP for this opportunity. I'm sorry that I couldn't join you in person. Unfortunately, a certain virus got in the way, and I wasn't allowed to travel. So yes, absolute pleasure to join this multi-stakeholder dialogue session and do a deep dive on some of the challenges that the airline sector faces in replacing single-use plastics with more sustainable alternatives. And hopefully many of these challenges will be overcome through the proposed treaty. As the trade association for 290 airlines, our primary role is to ensure we have safe skies, but also that airlines have a sustainable future. Recent IATA passenger surveys indicate that along with industry contribution to climate change, replacing single-use plastics with sustainable alternatives is one of the critical environmental challenges for the sector. Reinforcing actually what Danielle said about the visibility, plastics are widespread in aviation. In fact, we're going to rely on them to help meet our net zero carbon goal. 80% of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner is plastic composite. Airline audits have indicated that over 130 different single-use products are in the cabin. However, a significant number of these items are either rarely used, this is medical and life-saving equipment, or are mandated by civil aviation or public health authorities. These include liquid and gel bags, bags for liquids purchased at airport retailers or on board, plastic bags that line washrooms and galley bins, and certainly during the pandemic we had personal protective equipment and food packaging. And we also are aware that many of the cabin wastes, all of them are subjected to national regulations to ensure they're handled and stored, disposed of appropriately, which minimizes the potential that any plastic within our cabin waste ends up in the marine or terrestrial environment. Prior to the pandemic, airlines were flying 22,000 unique city pairs, with some airlines offering 300 destinations in over 120 countries. Unharmonized plastic regulations at state, regional, and airport level are causing us difficulties. Already, foreign airlines are being fined for using certain plastic products that are allowed under their own national legislation. Our research indicates that a minimum of 29 airlines have initiated single-use plastic replacement programs since the beginning of 2018. However, the rate of uptake has slowed significantly, partly in response to the pandemic and the fact that we still maintain stocks of unused single-use plastics at certain areas, in certain locations, but also as a result of these asymmetric regulations. Airlines, with their very complex and lengthy supply chains, cannot purchase sustainable alternatives that comply with all global requirements. With the growth in single-use plastic regulations, airlines effectively need to choose whether they comply with the rules at the country of departure or the rules at arrival. I'm actually sure that the maritime sector will also face the same challenges. Replacing single-use plastic items with reusable ones made from traditional materials such as glass, ceramics, and metal will have both a financial and an environmental cost. These heavier items will reduce fuel efficiency and increase CO2 emissions. Single-use plastic replacement in aviation should therefore be based on life cycle assessment approach, which ensures that alternative products minimize climate impact whilst not compromising strict safety, security, and hygiene controls. So, as you can see, the airlines are very keen to replace single-use plastics with sustainable alternatives, but we need to ensure that regulations promote and do not obstruct replacement, and we feel that the treaty represents an excellent opportunity to try and overcome some of these barriers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. John Godson. And I think you already raised many critical issues, which I hope member states will discuss in developing the treaty. We're going to go to sort of a discussion to deep dive in with some questions. Some of the questions that we had looked at for the session was how we direct and upscale finance for a plastic pollution-free economy, to look at trade measures, financial incentives, whether they're aligned, how to disincentivize, reduce flow of capital and investment operations that are looking into linear models, so looking at how we can invest into a circular economy model and the opportunities for partnership. I have the pleasure to invite Helena from the World Bank to join me in speaking. Helena, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the speakers. It was really interesting points to listen. So the World Bank, we have been providing analytics, advice, and financing to governments and to private companies through the IFC in more than over 40 countries. The World Bank has over 4 billion of ongoing projects across sectors that include activities aiming at preventing plastics pollution, and there are further $2 billion US dollars of projects in the pipeline that include activities that address plastic pollutions. And policies to curb plastic pollution face challenges due to markets and policy failures that create bottlenecks and broken links in the plastic value chain and prevent market-based investment and consumption decisions towards plastic circularities. So the World Bank, as we have been doing analytics, one of the analytics that has been done is the forthcoming Pathways Out of Plastic Pollution, which identifies how to address those challenges as countries pursue their efforts to end plastic pollution and mobilize towards a legally binding instrument. And this highlights basically three principles. One, to develop strategies and national action plans tailored to country context, then combine policy instrument in a coherent way to create the conditions for more sustainable markets with upstream incentives for producers and consumers that are essential for circularity, as well as downstream measures to improve solid waste management. And finally, to consider the true cost of plastics and alternatives to society from an environmental and societal point of view. So, of course, there is a broad consensus around this comprehensive approach to the solutions. And one thing that I also wanted to ask the speakers based on your presentation and on your backgrounds. So what are, in your opinion, some of the key elements for enabling environment that are needed to be set by governments to attract the private sector investments and create these enabling conditions? Thank you.
Very much, Helena. And I think that's an excellent question that's going to be posed to the speaker. But I believe I have two colleagues on the screen. I think I have Carolyn. May I start with you, please? And I think I'm going to have some help in terms. So it's Carolyn Dear Burbeck, please.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to take the floor. This is a really fascinating discussion, and at the Forum on Trade, Environment and SDGs, we really welcome the focus on international trade in this discussion today. So as speakers have already mentioned some of this, I think it's important to note that there are three reasons why plastic trade flows are relevant to plastic pollution. The first is, of course, there are trade flows of plastic waste to countries that have inadequate waste management capacity. And this exacerbates the leakage of plastics into the environment. We've also heard speakers mention the challenges related to trade in plastic products, as well as products containing plastics and pre-packaged in plastics, which also adds to the waste management burden of importing countries. And finally, we know that trade and investment connect the international supply chains through which plastics are produced and distributed around the world. In this context, no country alone can transform international supply chains. So countries really need to work together to transform the plastic supply chains and end the pollution that they create. Now, as Daniel has mentioned, there are many ways in which governments are trying already to use trade policy to supplement and support their national plastic pollution reduction strategies. But here it's really important that we find ways for these to be more coherent, coordinated and transparent if we really want to enable better environmental outcomes and provide the incentives and predictability that businesses need to invest. We have submitted a written statement on some of the trade policy options that delegates could consider in the INC process. But just to quickly mention four here, it would be important for delegates to consider if there are ways that they could introduce measures to reduce trade in avoidable, unnecessary, problematic and environmentally harmful plastic materials, inputs and products, to continue to support efforts underway in the Basel Convention to end trade in hazardous, mixed and contaminated plastic waste, but also to look for ways that they can promote trade and supply chains that support environmentally sustainable non-plastic substitutes, as some of the other speakers have mentioned, such as refill and reuse models, and also to support technologies that enable more sustainable and a circular plastics economy. And finally, the INC could also consider cooperation and coordination around standards and regulations needed to incentivize and underpin the shift to more sustainable plastic supply chains. So in so doing, we really recommend that the INC looks for ways to build synergies and cooperation with trade-related efforts in complementary processes, such as the work underway at the WTO through the informal dialogue on plastic pollution, which is a really fantastic effort by governments to identify areas in which they can cooperate. And there's also work underway in other international organizations, such as the World Customs Organizations, UNCTAD, Interpol, and the OECD, all of which can help governments in the INC context to look and understand better the trade dimensions of tackling plastic pollution. So thank you again for the opportunity to present our statement today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And now I invite another speaker online, Laheen Noah, please. I don't know, Laheen, if you can hear us. Well, actually, if I can really start and go back to our, our speakers, and maybe I start with Mr. Daniel Ramos. You've heard the other speakers, and if you have some reflections, please.
And Caroline and UNCTAD are great stakeholders and participants at the dialogue at the WTO, and they are really part of the reason that we have a little bit more clarity on the flows of plastics. So I hope that they can continue to contribute to the dialogue. On the question by our World Bank colleague, actually, I'm interested in your study. I think we need to talk and bring, because I think the answers will come from there. I think the discussions at least in the trade forum are in a formative stage, and they are really mapping the trade policies they already have in place and what is working and what is not working. So I guess they have the same question as you, as trying to understand what are these conditions that would make more market players to come to the fore and really change the unsustainable economic reality that we have in plastics economy now. And there are a lot of studies out there, as you know well. Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a lot of work, and UNEP contributes a lot to understanding this, but we are still trying to maybe put together one and two. What are the scientific requirements and the environmental requirements, and what are the trade and economic policies that will help us get there. So we're in this formative stage, and I hope we can count with World Bank to help us get there.
I think the World Bank's going to have excellent analytics, and I think we're all going to share a lot of the work. And Carolyn with UNCTAD has already talked about a lot of the issues. I'll go to Mr. John Godson, please.
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, so I think for us, I think what we initially thought was the replacement of single-use plastics as being primarily a technical or a supply chain issue. When we've started to research further, we realized that we're facing this legal challenge and this patchwork of different legislation, regulatory requirements, which is something which we think is going to undermine trade, and as well as causing difficulties for international transport. And also something I think was mentioned by Casimira regarding sustainability and green labeling. Another thing that we find is that airlines would really appreciate the development of standards for the sustainable alternatives. So the sustainability credentials of many of the alternatives are far from clear. And I think that's something which we would be well to focus on. So whether this is standardization in life cycle assessment approach or on certification of bio-based materials, composting, labeling, so that we have a clear path forward and ensure that we don't compromise and we carry on with ethical sourcing of alternatives. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. And if I can turn to Ms. Marla Garin Alvarez, please.
Yes, several points actually to address the question from our World Bank colleague. So, as you know, the banking industry, the financial industry is highly regulated, and this is true in the case of regulatory mandates related to sustainable finance and transitioning to a sustainable finance framework for all banks in the Philippines and in the rest of Asia. So one is there really has to be a mandate for things to move and for change to happen. Two, part of that mandate, at least for the Philippines, in terms of our transition, is a review of our environmental and social risk management system and identifying sectoral policies to address specific concerns, in this case related to plastics. So we are in that process actually right now, looking at our high risk sectors where we have high risk exposures for our loan portfolio. Now, the third item is, as I mentioned, providing projects for sustainable finance. So, in the Philippines, this is something that's quite new and developing. We're actually a pioneer since we have over 12 years of experience in this space. That's why we're also pioneering the blue bond issuance for this particular case. And then internally, there is the supply chain management for our supply value chain, and it's a great challenge to support our vendors through their own sustainability journey, which starts with awareness. Why do we need to do this? What is sustainability? What is ESG, or environmental, social, and governance? So we have to do some hand holding there in order to level set expectations, and also have them go through a review of how they are managing their own impact, and how they are addressing the use of plastic, and single use plastics in particular. And finally, um, a lot of the other speakers mentioned legal barriers. So we see this in terms of contradicting or conflicting zero waste policies, or local community ordinances or guidelines. Since we have branches nationwide, we have had to deal with different expectations, different guidelines. So standardizing that, and making sense so that it's all integrated, would be a great move towards really achieving a greater impact across the country.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alvarez. And now I will go to our last speaker, Ms. Picheva, who was our first speaker. Ms. Picheva, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you also for the comments and contributions of the rest of the speakers, and the colleagues, or the experts that joined after us. I would only confirm what my colleagues said in terms of enabling factors. I think it's clear that the plastic issues can be tackled only by the collective efforts from all related parties: the consumers, producers, society, government, very important role, like regulators, the financial system too. I think the role of multilateral organizations like the IFC, IBRD, UNEP is also very important, and actually, we see it in practice. It has a leading role in the moment by introducing certain requirements and multiplying it by their counterparties in the countries. I would again maybe emphasize the need of awareness and education, because I believe that, and it was mentioned in previous days, that when the problem with the plastic usage and the plastic pollution is well understood, I mean the environmental and the health issues by all the counterparties, I think it's easier then to also implement and enforce the so much needed regulations. Otherwise, we see already many ways to go around the regulations, to substitute one single-use plastic product with another, just to avoid some taxes, or formally comply with these regulations. So I would like to emphasize again the awareness is a high priority, and then the joint efforts of all the parties. And I believe, it's clear there are also moving out of the harmful types of plastic, improving waste management, improving the process throughout the whole life cycle, ultimately also brings competitive advantages and pays back in the long term. And it's simply the right thing we have to do.
Thank you very much. And I think we've had 4 excellent speakers. And I think we've heard some common messages. I think we've heard the importance of it's going to take all of us. It's going to take regulation. When we look at supply chain understanding, what we call the life cycle thinking on how trade and trade policies can be encouraged to transition to circular plastic economy. I think we're going to need the analytics, and we're going to need a platform. We're going to need agencies. We're going to need to be able to share information. We also heard the importance of compliance, importance of regulatory frameworks, importance of standardizing, harmonizing. And I think there's a lot of very good practices, but I think, in some of the examples, it's hard to uptake when there isn't standardization. So we've heard that. Again, it's going to be really important to have, the financial institutes, the banks, the investments, experts at the World Trade Organization, working with the multilateral development banks. So I think we're already at a really good start working towards this intergovernmental negotiating committee. May I now turn over to my UNEP colleague, Ms. Elisa Tonda, and she will give you a summary of actually the excellent multi-stakeholder dialogues over the week. Elisa, please.
Thank you very much, Dechen, and it will be difficult to make a summary after yours. But I'll start by, first of all, thanking very much the more than 50 speakers and moderators who have been with us this week and have supported us in thinking through, in engaging in these first multi-stakeholder dialogues. We have really been able to hear very different voices in the course of these 4 days. We have heard from academia, from waste picker, from indigenous communities, from industries, from NGOs, from youth, from the finance sector, from the trade community, from the UN system, international organization, and I'm sure I'm missing a lot of the voices that we have been hearing in the course of this week. And they all came with very strong messages of the actions that are already ongoing to address plastic pollution, the solutions that they are experimenting with, the knowledge that they are bringing to the table. And all of these with the common ambition of setting the bar high in what we want to achieve in the system change, in the transformation of the system that we agreed is needed in order to achieve the ambition of the UNEA resolution that, Dechen, you have been alluding to. So a starting point of a system change required, but also a very constant element that we have heard across all the different panels and conversation of readiness to be engaged and willingness to have a space in which the conversation of all these voices continues and feed into the process of negotiation that is happening in the plenary just besides our room. There are 6 elements, 6 opportunities that I just want to capture and that I somehow heard emerging across the dialogues that happened during this week, the 7 panels that have happened on Sunday and during the lunch breaks of these past 3 days. One is around interrogating what is the scale of the change in the production and consumption system required to end plastic pollution. And we've been talking in this context about how we would need to change the design, both of our system and of the products, and how this speaks to the additives that are part of the product, how this speaks to materials and potentially alternative materials. But if we push the challenge forward, it's really also about evaluating our needs and how we respond to our needs and whether those products are really what we need. So that would definitely be one area on which our conversation will continue. A second area which we have heard a lot, strongly in conjunction with the fact of us having to address a system and transforming a system. So we've heard in a lot of the panel that what we need to achieve that transformation is to connect the upstream with the downstream, is to connect all the elements of the value chain. And indeed, these are excellent platforms, the dialogues such as the one that we had in these past days, to really strengthen that connection and that link of the different actors of the system. I've heard a third element across the week, which also emerged in the conversation of today. We have heard a lot of action, a lot of initiatives are being tested, piloted, experimented, adapted, And in many of the panels, we have heard being tabled the very pertinent question of how do we scale that? And obviously, this is going to be an issue and a point that will continue to be on the table of our dialogues. How do we bring to scale the transformation and the lessons that we are learning in all these different initiatives and pilots? Across all the dialogues and very reinforced in today's dialogue has been the role of regulation, enabling policies, and, if I may, really very much inspired by today's conversation, coherent policies. And we have heard reference to different, a mix of policies that would really be instrumental to achieve that transformation. We've heard reference to fiscal policies and incentives. We've heard reference to extended producer responsibility in a lot of the panels that took place on Sunday. We've heard reference to right pricing as a way to bring consumers on board. We've heard reference today, but also in earlier panels, to the role of labeling. On Monday, we have heard a lot of attention to laborers and skill development related policies. We've also heard the opportunities and the importance of public investment in infrastructure as a key enabling factor. And today we've heard also a lot of the potential that trade policies are going to be playing in transforming our system, our production and consumption system. A fifth element that emerged in different facets in a lot of conversation is around our approach to plastic pollution, which, if I may say, for some time has been perceived as an environmental, nature-related problem. And in a lot of the panel, it became very loud and clear that this is shifting more and more towards an health agenda as well. And especially in the discussion that we were having yesterday, that was very much centered around individuals, people, that was really changing significantly the urgency of the narrative. And overall, in all conversation and in today's conversation as well, we have heard a loud call to the importance of awareness and education and getting everybody on board to be part of being the solution to the problem. And I'm not expecting to have been doing justice to all the elements that emerged during the dialogues that we had during these past 4 days. But indeed, these are been seeding a lot of ideas that will motivate us and hopefully the stakeholders that have been with us during this day to continue the conversation, to build on the seed that we have planted during these 4 days and continue accompanying the discussion of the international legally binding agreement with the voices of the different stakeholders and continue having this space for innovation, for solution, for exchanges active in the context of the and at the margins and feeding into the negotiation. So I want to reiterate my thanks to all the speakers that have joined us, but also all the participants that have been with us in person and online and have been following the conversations. And I just take the opportunity to thank particularly the speakers of this panel and Dechen, the moderator, for the excellent session. And I just would want to thank them with an applause.
So, colleagues, this concludes today's dialogue on upscaling, redirecting finance, incentives, and trade. I really want to thank you for your strong engagement, for the very interesting discussion. I had a feeling that all our speakers, I mean, if you had an opportunity to sit together, I mean, there's a lot of information we could share. There's a lot of learning to do. I also want to thank my colleagues from UNEP who've organized the multi-stakeholder dialogues over this last week. And I think this has been a really important opportunity to share and learn while governments are negotiating and really setting the process towards the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for a legally binding instrument. So with this, I thank you and have a very good afternoon, a very good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.